In the spring of 2024, a 28-year-old man stood in the middle of a vacant lot on the east side of Clover Ridge and told the foreman to break ground. The lot was flat and a little weedy, sandwiched between two older ranch houses on a street where most of the cars had some rust on them. It was not the kind of neighborhood where Bastian Cole usually built things. His firm had projects going in 3 states. He had a glass-walled office and a project manager named Derek, who handled the daily calls and a reputation for coming in under budget and ahead of schedule. None of that mattered on this particular lot. This one was personal, and it had been personal for 18 years. And when the foreman asked him whose house it was going to be, Bastian had to take a breath before he answered. He said it was for a woman who had fed him lunch when nobody else would, and that she didn't know yet. The foreman didn't push. He just nodded, put on his hard hat, and started making calls. That is where this story ends. To understand why it begins there, you have to go back 20 years to a Tuesday morning in September of 2004, and to a woman named Denise Watts, standing behind a steam table in the cafeteria of Clover Ridge Elementary School. Denise had been working that cafeteria for 3 years by then. She was 31 years old, 5'4", and she wore her hair pulled back in a net that she hated but never argued about. Her shoes were the black, rubber-soled, slip-resistant kind that every food service worker knows, the ones that feel fine at 6 in the morning and feel like punishment by noon. She made $9.50 an hour, after taxes, after the small amount she chipped in toward the school district's group health plan. She took home just under $1,300 a month. Her son Marcus was 6, in first grade 2 buildings over. And the reason she'd taken this particular job in the first place was that her start time matched his drop-off, and her end time matched his pickup from the after-school program. She had arranged her whole working life around a 6-year-old's school schedule, and she didn't think of that as sacrifice. She thought of it as math. The cafeteria at Clover Ridge ran 2 lunch periods for the elementary grades. The younger kids, kindergarten through 2nd grade, came through first at 11:15. The older grades followed at noon. Denise worked the steam table for the first shift and helped restock and clean for the second. Her co-worker, Loretta Sims, ran the register and handled the lunch accounts, which was a more diplomatic job than it sounded, because about a third of the kids were on the free and reduced price lunch program, and Loretta had to manage that with enough discretion that the kids who weren't on it couldn't tell who was. Loretta was 52 and had 3 grown children and an opinion about everything, which she mostly kept to herself during the lunch rush and saved for Denise during the 15-minute break they took together in the back near the walk-in cooler. On that Tuesday in September, Denise was ladling chicken and rice onto trays and watching the line move. She knew most of the kids by the end of the first week. Not their names necessarily, not all of them, but their faces and their habits. She knew which 2nd graders grabbed 2 milks and hoped she wouldn't notice, and which ones scraped the vegetables to the side the moment they sat down, and which ones were hungry enough to clean the tray without being told. She noticed the boy at the end of the line because he was slow. Not slow in a way that held things up, just careful, the way a child is careful when he is not entirely sure he belongs somewhere. He was small for his age, with close-cut hair and a backpack that was a little too big for his frame, and he carried his tray with both hands the way her own son did when he was trying very hard not to spill. He got to her station, and she ladled his food, and he said thank you in a voice she had to lean forward to hear. He took his tray to the far end of the cafeteria, to the table nearest the window, and he sat down alone. Denise watched him for a moment. The seat next to him was empty. The seats across from him were empty. A cluster of kids at the next table over were laughing about something, loudly, oblivious to him. He opened his milk carton carefully and began to eat. She didn't say anything that day. She went back to the line and finished the shift. She didn't think about it too hard, but she filed it. The way people file small things that mean something they can't yet name. His name, she learned by the end of that week, was Bastian Cole. He was 8 years old. His family had moved to Clover Ridge over the summer from somewhere farther south, and he was in second grade with a teacher named Mrs. Okafor, who spoke well of him when Loretta asked around. He was quiet, he did his work, he ate alone. By the third week, Denise had started watching to make sure he got through the line before the chicken ran out. This was not a formal arrangement. Nobody told her to do it. There was no policy about it. What happened was simple. On days when the chicken was running low, she would portion out a plate for the end of the line before the rush hit, and she would set it on the lower shelf below the steam table, where it would stay warm, and when Bastian came through, she would pull it up and put it on his tray. She didn't make a ceremony of it. She didn't lean over and tell him she'd saved it for him. She just handed him his tray the same as everyone else and said, "There you go, baby," which is what she said to everyone. And he said thank you in that same quiet voice and went to his seat by the window. Loretta noticed after about 2 weeks. She waited until their break, took a sip of her coffee and said, "You saving plates for that little boy?" Denise said, "The chicken runs out sometimes." Loretta said, "Mm-hmm," and did not press because Loretta understood things without needing them explained. What Denise did not know, what she had no way of knowing, was that for Bastian Cole, that tray was the most reliable thing about his day. His home life was not stable in ways that a second grader could not fully describe, but could absolutely feel. His mother worked long hours and often didn't make it home for dinner. His father was in and out. The apartment they'd moved into was quieter than any place he'd lived before. Quiet in the way that means absent rather than peaceful. He was a child who had learned to be small, to take up as little space as possible, to expect that food and attention and warmth were things that ran out before they got to him. And then every day, around 11:20 in the morning, a woman behind a steam table looked at him as if he were expected, as if his being there was not an inconvenience but a fact she'd already accounted for. She saved him a plate. She handed it to him warm. She said, "There you go, baby," and meant it. He thought about that. He, in the way that an 8-year-old thinks about things, turning them over, checking to see if they were real. After 2 months, he was pretty sure they were. After 4 months, he stopped being surprised by it. It became the thing he counted on. Denise did not know any of this. She knew his name and his order, and that he liked extra rice when there was any left over. She knew he never complained and always returned his tray to the rack on his way out. She knew he had a gap between his 2 front teeth, and that when he smiled, which was not often, it changed his whole face. She kept doing it. That was the whole of it. She kept doing it because it was the right thing to do and because it cost her nothing, except the small attention it took to notice. And she had always believed that noticing a child was the least a grown person owed them. The school year ended. She saw him in the fall, first day of 3rd grade, walking into the cafeteria with the same backpack, a little taller, still ending up at the table by the window. She handed him his tray and said, "Good summer?" And he said, "Yes, ma'am." And that was that. The rhythm resumed as if it had never stopped. If you are wondering whether the people around Denise appreciated what she was doing, the answer is that they mostly did not see it. The cafeteria ran 412 children through its 2 lunch periods every day, and there was too much noise and motion for anyone to be tracking the quiet rituals of one woman and one child at the end of the steam table line. Principal Hale, who had been at Clover Ridge for 11 years and ran a tidy ship, would not have thought of it as something requiring attention. It was not in the budget, and it was not on the incident report, and it was not a problem, which meant it was not really on his radar. He was a decent enough man, not cruel, not especially warm, the kind of administrator who kept the trains running and hoped that was sufficient. Loretta saw it. Loretta saw most things. She didn't comment further after that first morning, but she started making sure the rice pots stayed a little fuller toward the end of the first lunch period, and she never explained why, and Denise never asked. The second school year passed the way the first one had. Tuesday, chicken. Thursday, pasta. The occasional pizza. Friday, that Bastian seemed to like best. He turned 9 in the spring, and then 10 the following spring, and Denise brought him a cupcake from home on his April birthday each year because she'd learned the date from the class list Loretta had somehow obtained. He turned the color of something warm when she put it on his tray, and he said thank you 3 times, which she thought was just about the most polite thing she'd ever seen a child do. She had now been feeding him lunch, quietly, without ceremony, for the better part of 2 school years. Roughly 340 school days if you counted them all. She had not counted them. They were just days. In March of 2006, Bastian stopped coming to school. It happened the way those things sometimes happen, without announcement. One Tuesday, he wasn't in the line. She set aside a plate out of habit, and then, when the shift ended and he hadn't come through, she slid it back and kept working. She figured he was sick. On Thursday, he wasn't there either. By the following Monday, she asked Loretta, who made a quiet inquiry, and came back the next day with the information that the Cole family had moved, relocated out of the district, effective 2 weeks prior. Denise stood at the steam table and heard this and nodded. She was in the middle of a lunch rush. She didn't have time to think about it, so she didn't. She kept ladling. Later, in the back, near the walk-in cooler, Loretta said, "You all right?" Denise said, I just hope he's okay." Loretta put a hand on her arm for a moment and then let go because there was nothing more to say, and they both knew it. Denise filed it. She said it in the part of herself where the small sadnesses go, the ones that don't have names or resolutions, the ones you carry because you loved something briefly, and then it moved on. She did not expect to hear from him again. Children moved, families relocated. The cafeteria kept running. She kept ladling. She kept that job for 5 more years. In the spring of 2011, the Clover Ridge School District announced budget cuts. The cafeteria staff at 3 elementary schools were going to be reduced. They would bring in a contracted food service provider, which meant a different company, a different crew, and no positions for the existing employees. Denise received her notice in a manila envelope sent to her home address. It said her last day would be June 3rd. It thanked her for 7 years of service to the students and staff of Clover Ridge Elementary School and included information about filing for unemployment benefits. She sat at her kitchen table and read it twice. Marcus was 14 by then, in 8th grade, lanky and quiet in a way that reminded her of someone she couldn't quite place. He came into the kitchen, saw her face, and said, "Mom?" She folded the letter and set it on the table and said, "I'm going to need to find a new job." He sat down across from her and said, "Okay, we'll figure it out." She looked at her son and thought, not for the first time, that he was going to be all right no matter what, and that was enough to hold on to. She found work at a school cafeteria in the next district, which paid $9.75 an hour and was a 40-minute bus ride from their apartment because she'd had to give up the car the year before when the transmission went. She did that for 2 years, then took a second job on weekends at a grocery store deli counter, which added 8 or 9 hours a week and left her tired in a way that went down to the bone by Sunday evening. The apartment cost $910 a month, which she had managed for years with careful arithmetic. Rent first, then utilities, then Marcus's school expenses, then food, then everything else distributed across whatever was left. For a long time, the arithmetic worked. It was tight, but it worked. She did not eat out. She did not take vacations. She had a savings account with $340 in it, which she did not touch because it was the number below which she refused to fall. In the summer of 2014, her landlord sold the building. The new owner sent a letter informing the tenants that the building was being converted to market-rate rentals and that their current leases would not be renewed. Denise had 45 days. Her rent would have to double in any comparable unit in the neighborhood, because the market had moved while her lease held it in place, and she did not have the deposit for a new place on top of what she was already carrying. Marcus was 17. He had a part-time job at a hardware store on Saturdays and was saving for community college. When Denise told him what was happening, he came home the next day with his savings, $412 in a folded envelope, and put it on the kitchen table. She pushed it back toward him and said, "That's for school." He pushed it back and said, "School can wait." She cried then, which she did not do often, and he sat across from her and waited, which he was good at. She spent the next 3 weeks looking for an apartment she could afford. She didn't find one. What she found was a rooming house, 7 blocks over, that rented by the week, and a cousin in the next county who could take Marcus for a while so he could finish his senior year without moving schools. She paid the rooming house 1 week at a time and took every extra shift she could get and ate whatever was left in the back of the deli case at the end of the day. She lived like that for 4 months before she found a small, 1-bedroom rental on the east side of Clover Ridge, on a street where most of the cars had some rust on them, where the landlord was an older man named Gerald who had been renting to the same tenants for years and priced his units accordingly. The apartment cost $750 a month. It was small, and the windows let in drafts in winter, and the bathroom tile had a crack along the baseboard that she'd been meaning to caulk for years. She moved in with a folding table, a second-hand couch, and a box of kitchen things she'd kept through all of it. She hung a photo of Marcus above the kitchen table. She put her $340 back into the savings account. She kept going. If you found your way to this story, maybe you know someone like Denise, someone who just keeps going, not because life is easy, not because they are numb to the weight of it, but because they have decided, quietly and without announcement, that they are going to show up. Drop a comment and tell me about someone you know who kept going when most people would have stopped. And stay with this story because the part you've been waiting for is just ahead. The years between 2014 and 2024 were not dramatic. That is something the narrator owes you. The truth that dignity under pressure is rarely dramatic. Denise worked. She ate modest meals. She sent Marcus money when she could and accepted small amounts back when she couldn't. He finished community college and got a job doing facilities management for a regional property company. He was good at it. He was steady. He called her every Sunday and came for dinner once a month and fixed whatever was broken in the apartment when he visited, which was usually the draft around the kitchen window or the bathroom tile that she still hadn't caulked. She had a life. It was a real one, with its own pleasures. her church on Sunday mornings, Loretta, who had retired from the school district in 2018 and now lived 12 blocks away and came over on Fridays to watch television and argue about the news. The deli job had given way to a cafeteria position at a community center, which was quieter and had better hours, and where she was, after 8 years, something like the institution itself. The person the new staff asked when they didn't know the procedure, the one who always knew where the extra serving spoons were kept. She thought about Bastian Cole sometimes, not often. The way you think about someone whose story you never finished reading. She hoped his life had gone somewhere good. She had no way of knowing and no reason to expect she ever would. What she did not know was that in 2024, in a glass-walled office on the 14th floor of a building downtown, Bastian Cole thought about her almost every day. He was 28 years old, and he ran a housing development firm called Cole Structures that had 42 employees and current contracts totaling just over $68 million. He had built the company from the ground up, starting with a single small renovation project he'd funded himself at 22, working 18-hour days and sleeping on a cot in the office for the first 2 years. People who worked for him said he was fair and that he was relentless, and that he had an unusual quality for someone his age, which was that he remembered where he came from. He remembered it specifically. He remembered what it felt like to be small and uncertain, and to not know what was waiting at the end of a given day. He remembered the cafeteria at Clover Ridge Elementary, and the table by the window where he ate alone. And he remembered the woman behind the steam table who said, "There you go, baby," and meant it. Who pulled his plate from the shelf below the steam table when the chicken was running low before he'd even asked, before he'd even known there was such a thing as someone planning for you, making a small, quiet space in their day for the fact of you. He had thought about finding her for years. He hadn't acted on it because he wasn't sure what he would say, wasn't sure whether it would mean anything to her, wasn't sure whether he'd built it up into something larger than it was. Then in February of 2024, he had a conversation with his project manager, Derek, about a charitable initiative the firm was considering, something involving affordable housing units in the county. And partway through the conversation, Bastian stopped and thought about it differently. He thought about a woman who had fed him lunch for 2 school years on $9.50 an hour. He thought about what it might have cost her over time, not the food itself, but the care, the consistency of it, the years she'd presumably gone on living without anyone accounting for what she had done. He told Derek to hold the initiative. He called the school district's Human Resources Office instead. The woman he spoke to was professionally cautious about releasing personnel information, which was correct. He explained that he was a former student and that he was trying to reach a cafeteria employee who had worked at Clover Ridge Elementary in the mid-2000s, and she told him that she couldn't share addresses, but that she could pass along a message to the last known contact on file. He sent the message. He included his name and his office phone number, and a sentence that said, "I'm the boy who sat by the window. I'd like to say thank you." He waited 3 weeks. Nothing came back. He reached out again, this time through a different contact in the district, an old teacher named Mrs. Okafor, who was still in the system and who remembered him. She still remembered the quiet boy in her second-grade class who read during recess and never caused trouble. She told him she remembered Denise Watts and that she had heard, through the general institutional memory of people who had worked at Clover Ridge, that Denise was still in the area. She could not give him an address either, but she gave him the name of the community center where Denise had last been mentioned as working. He called the community center on a Wednesday morning in April. The woman who answered said that yes, Denise worked there, and that she usually came in at 7, and left by 2:30. She said it with the easy candor of someone who had no reason to be guarded. Because why would she be? It was just a question about a cafeteria worker. Bastian thanked her. He hung up. He sat at his desk for a long time looking out at the city. He thought about what he wanted to say. He thought about whether showing up at her job was the right approach or whether he should try to reach her at home first. He decided that home was more private, that she deserved to hear this without an audience if she wanted that. He asked Derek, who handled a lot of the company's community outreach and was good at finding things, to locate her home address through the standard channels. It took Derek 4 days. The address came back as a 1-bedroom rental on a street on the east side of Clover Ridge. On a Thursday afternoon in late April, Bastian drove himself. He did not bring Derek. He parked on the street in front of a house with rust-colored shutters and walked up the front path of the apartment building and knocked on the door of Unit 2. Denise answered in her work clothes, not yet changed, a cardigan, over her uniform shirt, her hair still netted. She had a dish towel in her hand. She looked at the man at her door and waited for him to say what he'd come to say. He said, "Ms. Watts, my name is Bastian Cole. I used to be a student at Clover Ridge Elementary." She looked at him. Something moved across her face, a kind of reaching, the way a person looks when a word is on the edge of their memory. He said, "I sat by the window in the cafeteria. You used to save me a plate before the chicken ran out." The dish towel stopped moving. She stood very still. He said, "You never ran out before you got to me. Every time, for 2 years." Her hand came up to her mouth. Not in a dramatic way, just the way a person does when they need a moment, and their body finds one before their mind does. She pressed her fingers against her lips, and she looked at him, and she was quiet for 5 or 6 seconds. Then she said, "Baby, you're all grown up." He nodded. His jaw was tight in the way of someone who has practiced being composed and is currently losing the practice. She said, "Come in." He came in. The apartment was small and clean. There was a second-hand couch with a blanket folded over the back of it, and a photo of Marcus on the wall above the kitchen table. It was the same photo she had hung the day she moved in, a little faded now. Marcus at 17 in his hardware store polo, grinning the grin that was exactly hers. She gestured for him to sit. He sat at the table. She put the dish towel down on the counter and stood across from him and said, "How did you find me?" He told her about the school district, about Mrs. Okafor, about the community center. He told it plainly, and she listened with both hands flat on the table, the way Marcus did when he was paying close attention. When he finished, she said, "I thought about you. I didn't know if you were all right." He said, "I'm all right. I've been thinking about how to tell you something for a long time, and I kept not knowing how, so I'm just going to say it." She waited. He said, "I had a hard time at home when I was little. My parents weren't really around in the way that counts, and I was always waiting for things to run out, food or attention or space. I was always waiting for the part where there wasn't enough, and you kept saving me a plate every day. You didn't know me, I wasn't your kid, you just did it because you noticed, and because that's who you are." He paused. "I built my company on the idea that a person can plan ahead for someone who needs it, that you can look down the line and see who's coming and make room before they get there. I got that idea from a cafeteria steam table when I was 8 years old." Denise put both hands over her eyes. She made a sound that was not quite crying and not quite breathing, something between the two. He waited. She took her hands down and looked at him with eyes that were full but steady, and she said, "I didn't do anything special. I just made sure you had enough to eat." He said, "I know. That's what I mean." They sat together for a moment in the particular quiet of two people who have both said the truest thing they know how to say. Then he told her the rest. He told her that he had purchased a lot 6 blocks from where she was sitting, that he had a foundation poured, that he was building her a house, 2 bedrooms, a real kitchen, good windows that did not let in drafts, a bathroom with new tile, a yard with a little porch in the back, that it would be done by the end of the year, and that it was hers. Not a loan, not a lease. Hers. She looked at him for a long time without speaking. Then she said, "Bastian." He said, "I know." She said, "That's too much." He said, "2 school years. 340 days, give or take. It's not enough." She shook her head slowly. She shook. Her eyes were full again. She said, "I need to call my son." He said, "Okay." She called Marcus. She put him on speaker and told him there was someone he needed to hear from, and Bastian introduced himself and said, plainly and without embellishment, what he'd told Denise. Marcus was quiet for a moment on the other end of the line, and then his voice came through the phone, unsteady, and he said, "Sir, my mother is a good woman." Bastian said, "I know that. That's why I'm here." Loretta found out the following Friday. She came over, as she always did,